Hello everyone, welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to take a look at how you can add some animation to your lower thirds and use that to reveal a sponsor logo during a production. And we're doing this specifically against something that somebody had asked me previously if it was possible to do. So before we get to that, I want to invite everybody, if you have any comments, have any questions you'd like answered, just post them below and we'll get to them during the show. And if you'd like to join us live on air, again, you can just, basically we have a link in the show notes and here up on the screen. So if you'd like to, just go to that link and somebody from the studio will get you on with us. All right, so let me start by showing you what it is that we're actually looking to create. So here in vMix, I have this lower third I put together, which would be sort of a pretty standard type of scoreboard bug across the bottom that you'd have that would stay on and keep people up to date with all the stats around the game in question. But if you had sponsors, what we wanted to give you was the ability to let this slide open, sort of show a sponsor logo, a little tagline, and then be able to just close up. And we also wanted to do it so that if you had multiple sponsors that you needed to do within a specific, advertising frame, you could do this and then just pop to the next one and pop to the next one and make it so that it's something that you would be easily able to do for a single sponsor at a spot or multiple sponsors in a spot. So when somebody basically showed me this off of coverage of a game they had seen and was saying, is it possible to do? And so my first thought with that was, well, the GT Title Designer does have animation. So let me actually switch over to GT Title Designer's animation and show you why that wasn't the path we chose over here. So if you go over to, let's see, I have GT Title Designer over here. So if you look at, this is a very basic sort of layout. What I have is the image, the lower third, broken into 3 layers. So there's sort of a top layer on the left-hand side, which you see I just turned on and off, a top layer on the right-hand side, which I turned on and off, and then overall the bottom layer, which is where you would have the sponsor logo coming up. So the issue, well, you can have all these things broken out in layers and you can manipulate them. Animations inside of GT Title Designer are really about bringing an asset on or off the screen at a given period of time. They're not really designed to do anything that would be motion-based. Because, I looked at this and said, we could do things with pages and whatever and set things up so I reveal certain things in certain pages. But everything that's done with animation is basically done against everything in this fixed position or everything that's transitioned off the screen, either through fading or through moving off the screen. So in looking at this, it was like, this is not going to be the approach. So what did we do? Basically, what we decided to do was to split this up. So as opposed to having one GT title, what we did is we took each segment of this, the top left, the top right, and that bottom, which has the advertising, and we created separate GT titles for each of those, and then used an input to stack them on top of each other. And from there, we have a lot more flexibility for how we want to handle everything with sort of automating the movement of these. So let me switch over to vMix and give you a little bit of a insight into how we set up the preset here. So as I said, our first 3 entries here, our first 3 inputs, are all around the 3 GT titles. The top left, this is the bottom, the top left and then the top right. And we assemble them here, these three GT titles, we assemble them as layers here. And so in this assembly, we just stack them all up with the bottom, left and right that are all set up here. And so this was the basic premise for how we're going to work with these. The other thing, though, is so we set these up here as one assembled, as you saw, but then we also set them up with them slid over to the sides. So now we have two inputs, one with the three GT title decomposed elements sort of spread out, and one with them all compact to show the scoreboard. So that's the basic premise. And then we are using a mix input where we have the two versions, the opened and the closed version of the scoreboard, and we do a merge between them. And that's basically the model that we're using for this. And from there, we do more to get everything in that we want to get in for doing the, making this simple to pick the sponsor and that. And we'll do that next. But first, I wanted to jump in. We have some people in the comments section. So you demand, thank you for joining us today, you. It's always good to see you. Tom from Eastern Shore Broadcasting, the sort of the progenitor of all of these streaming production shows. So thank you, Tom, for joining. So Tom Eagle saying the YouTube chapter marks from last session are working wonderfully. So that's great, Tom. I'm glad that that worked out for you. And hopefully, this is going to make your workflow a little simpler. Tom, thank you. I appreciate that, Tom. So, Michael, good to see you. Good. So glad to have you here. Thank you. Okay. So let's me jump over here now. And what I want to do is we'll go into a little bit of how I have this all worked out. So for everything here, I have basically a mini script. I use this in Script Start Dynamic, and we just have them assigned to keys on the keyboard. But this turns around and lets me pick the sponsor that I want. And the reason we can make this all work is that we took all the sponsor information and we put that into an Excel spreadsheet. So let me just open this up. And I think I have this all here. So I have this Excel spreadsheet that we have, which has the image that we want to have for the sponsor image that's sitting in there. And then we have the tagline that will go under that. And so we are using that. We brought that in as a data source through Data Source Manager. And we're using that to populate what we have. And we also have an empty one. So sort of this one on the bottom, the first row inside the data source, basically is just this little empty image, which is sort of a metal grid. And then we pick the logo that we want to replace that with. So that's how we have this set up. And then in the code for handling this, what we have is first, we do a merge, which creates that. But we don't just do the merge on the input, on the mix input. What we do is we take this input, which is the scoreboard closed, and we assign that to mix one. So we say do a merge with whatever is in mix one and the scoreboard closed. And this initializes what we're doing. It basically says close the scoreboard if it's open, but if it's closed, it doesn't do anything. So there's no visual impact if the scoreboard is already closed up. So we get that, and we do that in 500 milliseconds. So basically a quick slide in. We wait, which is doing the sleep for 400 milliseconds. And then what we do is we select the data source row to be null. So if it were opened and had a logo on there, and then when it starts to close, it waits till it's pretty much all the way closed. So this delay of 400 milliseconds with a duration of 500 means in that last 100 milliseconds, I take the sponsor logo away if there was one there and sort of just put up the blank one. So that's sort of what we're doing. Then I wait for it to close completely. And then we come back and say, now let's just go and we'll do the merge with the ad. So we do this slightly longer. This is for, with the sponsor ad, this is for 1 second now with a duration of 100 milliseconds, again, on that mix one input. And then we wait just a little bit to let it start to open. And then we turn around and we select the data source row. And that's how we push the ad in there. So it doesn't have this where the ad is there in advance with the tagline. The thing starts to open and then we show the ad. So this makes it feel a little more polished as you push this ad out. And for closing it, we basically just do pretty much what we did at the top here. We go in here and we just say, merge the close to mix 500 milliseconds, and then halfway through it, we just shut it off and shut the sponsor logo off and go back to the blank logo. And, just to be, thorough with the methodology, if we go over to our bottom element here in the vMix preset, if I open this up, let's see here. So on the screen here, if I go into the title editor, we just have the data source coming in, and it is basically saying take whatever row is selected, and we're using the tagline field. So if you remember when I opened the Excel spreadsheet, we had tagline, so that was in there. And so we have that that we pull in. And for the image, what we're doing is we are coming in here and we are using data source and taking the image URL. And so these are just PNG files that we have stored in a fixed location on our system, and then we can just pick from them. And this is, again, just pulled out of our Excel spreadsheet into Data Sources Manager. So in putting this combination together, this means that if I have changing sponsors, all I have to do is take the same location and put all the new sponsor images in. And from there, I can just, basically pull that in through Data Sources Manager. And as long as I have enough keyboard buttons for the different numbers of data sources, sponsors that I want to be able to display during a program, this should be something that you can use, session to session. So every game you can update them. It also means, because these things are URIs, that you could do things that are web-based and basically sort of push this out and say, I could have sponsors being added dynamically to a game, where I just turn around and say, as long as I can go out and I have a URI spot, you can have somebody go and just add these things out on the web, even from a remote location, and you'll be able to pull them in. So different ways that you could handle this to make this work as a workflow as well as simply technically. So I think we have a few more comments here. So let's, okay, so we have Michael Drummond is saying, do you think Keynote could have created the lower third? Yeah, I mean, Keynote or PowerPoint could have. I don't know if, and again, sorry, I'm not as familiar. I don't know if Keynote would let you put out something with a transparent background, or whether you'd have to put in something, with a colored background that you could key out. But yeah, I think that would be something you could probably do. The issue there is how you would, through automation, change the sponsor logo. So the technical piece of moving the elements around, I think, certainly could do in Keynote. I'm just not familiar enough with, the latest versions of Keynote to know whether making that replacement would have been something you could do through a data set, or whether that would be something you just have to build in and create different slides in Keynote to do replacements there. So I'm sorry I don't know that. It may be something that you could just easily do through a data set. But this is, again, there's lots of different ways. And that's one of the wonderful things about all this. There's just so many different approaches to accomplish the same thing in this space. All right. So Michael's saying this is much better looking than the vMix 3D rotating logo. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate, a lot of those things are, I think, more demonstration than practical. But yeah, I think the goal in everything, I think, as we produce content is to think of it truly from the artistic side. Like when I was talking about how we did the script, it wasn't simply about getting that data element replaced. There was some thought about when do you want to replace it so it doesn't feel abrupt, or there's not like a tagline with the thing fully closed behind it. So it feels like it went away at the right time or appeared at the right time. Those types of things matter. So I think, Michael's broader point is, we probably need to think very much about the whole expression of a creative idea. And not, and I know I tend to fall in the trap of being more technical, but, finding a way to merge the artistic with the technical to make these things work well. So Biz Shorty, good to see you, Biz. Thank you for joining us. So Tom is asking, he says, I thought you were using Mix 2 for the merge, but it's Mix 1 in your script. Okay. This is actually a very important point. So inside of vMix, they have different, they use different base references for things they do in scripting. So you can sort of do a base 0 reference where you basically use this as an offset. And they say, okay, technically, I want to go 0 elements from the beginning. So that's sort of the 0 reference. And then you can also have things which are sort of index referenced, where it will be, I want to use the first one. So if you're doing sort of an offset reference, you'd use 0. And if you're doing an index reference, you use 1. Well, vMix has a mix of both. And so it can be very confusing sometimes when you're looking at code. So inside of vMix, the UI, the interface you're looking with the preset, Mix 1 is your standard. That's my baseline when I switch between preview and production screens and my program screens. That is Mix 1 in the vMix UI. In vMix code, that's Mix 0. So that will be what you'd have when you move between these two. That's Mix 0. The Mix 2 that you see inside of the vMix setup, where I had the preset, where it is Mix 2, is actually in code listed as Mix 1. So this over here, which is my Mix 2, when you look at the code, it's going to say use Mix 1. So I know that can be very confusing and it isn't consistent. So there'll be times where you will see it using an index reference versus an offset reference. And that's something that you just have to sort of be aware of as you do this. But it's, I agree, it is confusing and it isn't something that, if, I guess, and to be very fair to them, when you have something that's evolving over the number of years that, vMix has, it's version 27 now. So clearly there's a lot of legacy in there. Some decisions were made that made sense for where the product was in an earlier date. But if you change it at a later date, you can break things. So there is sort of an evolution of the standard frameworks that were being used, and that followed along, with that. But, I don't mean that to be critical. It's just something you have to be aware of, when you think about the code. So good. Glad that makes sense, Tom. Thanks. Okay. So I know this was a short show, and I I'm hopeful that you still found it valuable. But what I'd like to do is we'll wrap the show up, and we'll go into the post show. And again, we can answer any questions anybody has and dig into any other thoughts for different approaches. But as I said, for the next, probably through the summer, we'll try to do this every 2 to 3 weeks, and give myself a little bit more time to get back to where I need to be. But I definitely, when we start up again in the fall for season 5, we will definitely be doing things on a consistent basis again, and hopefully, we won't disappoint with the number of shows we do between now and then. But why don't we wrap this up? I'll say goodbye to everybody that can't join us for the post show, and until I do see you all again, if you're not in the post show, be safe, be well. Otherwise, I'll see you in a couple of seconds. Take care, everyone. All right, everybody, welcome back to the post show. So thank you. And Tom, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this. I think the merge function is one of those things where there's lots of different things you can do with it. And because it takes all of the attributes, I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the things that I'd actually thought of doing, but I didn't want to sort of overdo it, was to have some sort of video background that sort of, so when the sponsor ad came up, you'd have sort of like sparkles around the background of the sponsor. And you could have done that with the merge. If you had sort of an alpha channel video, you could just shrink it down so it just hides behind the backdrop. And then when you open up, that merge will let that sort of grow, because you can change the size of an element in the merge as well as positioning. So that, that gives you, a lot of flexibilities to do some interesting creative stuff on here. So thank you, Tom. That's always fun to have you join us. So Biz, thank you. Yeah, I mean, no worries. I hopefully, this is something that you think you could apply to shows that you're doing as well. So thank you. So, yep, this is, I am moving along. So, I am very positive about, getting back to where I was prior to everything. And, I really, really appreciate all the support I've been getting from all of you here in the community. That means a lot to me. So Michael's saying, a hint for whoever uses scripting to look for a given input. Use param name instead of number. Numbers will change whenever you insert, move around an input. Yeah, I mean, so that is really a good point to keep in mind. When I first started, with scripting, I actually, wasn't using the names. I was using like GUIDs or, because they didn't change, and even if you move them around, but with just having names, it just makes it so much easier. And that's basically what I've been doing, for the last season of doing the scripting. I just put the input names and use that. And, you just need to make sure, you get capitalization and don't add extra spaces and all the other stuff, because it is an exact thing. But if you have that, it works so much more easily than, dealing with numbers and running into scripts if you edit an input, or GUIDs and having to try to figure out, well, what input is this? Because I got to look up the GUIDs in the, the vMix XML to figure out what is the GUID for it. And a GUID is just each input in vMix has a unique identifier that's associated with it called a GUID. And that's just a long string of random numbers that uniquely identifies an element inside code. And so that's available there inside of the vMix XML, but names are the way to go. So Biz is saying he's learned a lot about vMix over the years that we've been doing the show, and but he knows nothing about scripting, and he says he's intimidated, to be honest. I think that there are many levels to getting on board with scripting, and I think what we did here is effectively, it isn't detailed scripting. What we did is we created almost a macro of shortcuts. And I think that's the best way to start with scripting. So actually, I mean, if I can switch over to my Visual Studio Code here, everything that we have here, basically each one of these API.function, these just line up specifically with what you would have inside of a shortcut. So if you went into vMix and did a shortcut assignment, this is basically what the shortcut name is. And this would be the input you select, and then usually the parameters. So you'll see if you went into the shortcut and looked at merge, these elements would all be there. And you would be able to just assign them through dropdowns. All you're doing in this type of sort of macro scripting, where I'm just combining shortcuts, is I'm taking them, putting them in a different framework, and then controlling the timing between them to get them to play out in a sequence at given times that makes sense. So this makes it much easier. But each of these, merge, data source select row, merge, and data source select, these are just standard shortcuts. And if you went into vMix and added them there, you'd see them. So I think that's the best way. And when you become comfortable with this, then you can start to add additional things where you do, things around conditional values. So if, a data element is a certain value, or if an input is in program, things like that, where you want to do a series of commands, that really becomes the next logical level, where you're sort of taking these types of functionality things that you have here, but then putting conditional logic that says, do these sets of things if this is true, otherwise do these sets of things. And then, I know we've had other shows that sort of go way deep into, manipulating data and writing stuff out. But I think ultimately, if you start there, you'll become comfortable with this, and hopefully, feel good about all the things that you want to be able to accomplish with automation. And there's no reason you have to feel like you have to be able to do all of it either. Everybody has a level of comfort for where they want to be, and I think that's great. Work within that. Push it a little bit. So, see, where you can grow to. But I think this is a good way to start. So Tom is asking, please show us how you execute the script. So, okay, let me jump over to the preset in vMix, since we're over here. That's so in settings, if you go to shortcuts, what I have is just a series of shortcuts with all of the logic in here. So let me I'll open up one of these. So I just have this mapped to my one key because this is the first sponsor ad here. And I use a script start dynamic, which basically says it's like using scripting, but it just lets me put the block of code right down in here. And so all I'm doing is all of the code that you saw inside Visual Studio when I showed that, I just push that in here. And again, it's exactly what we had over there, where I'm doing the merge to close it, waiting, then selecting the data source row to go back to our blank, and then doing the same things here where sleep, then I do the merge to open it, and as I start to open it, then I select the data source row with the advertiser, sponsor, and their tagline. And so this is just tied to the number one key. So if you just look at this, when I'm doing this, if I go here and can't really see, but when I press the one key, it is just executing that sequence, and that's exactly how it's done. So there's no special thing you have to do with the with traditional scripting. But to sort of just touch on that, if I wanted to, I could have gone in and set this up as in regular scripting. And the way you would do this, so that's just hitting the scripting. And again, going up to the settings, hit the scripting. You can add something. And I could say, sponsor one. Create it local. I'll just copy the code out of here, paste it in here. So this would be, in doing this with scripting, this would be basically very similar to what I did with the shortcuts with script start dynamic. But now I'm creating this as an actual script. So if you have that in, you can save it, close it, and then up here, if I wanted to, so let's put this to the side, I can start. And so you can see it just did the close, like I said, if there was a sponsor there, and then it opened it again. But that's using it with standardized scripting. So both ways, they're basically doing identical things, just two different models for how those would go together. So hopefully that covers, but if you wanted to do things that involved more complex scripting, this is where you would be doing this in the edit script space, and you could put conditional logic and other things so that, you open up the vMix XML, read the status of, are overlays on or overlays off, who's in preview, who's in program, all those things, and make decisions around how you want it to do those types of things. But that's basically how it would all work. So hopefully that covers that. So that's how you can get sleep into a shortcut. Yes, that is exactly how you do that. And so script start dynamic is really your friend with this stuff. If you just go and use the API.function and then sort of jump into that where you put in quotes, the shortcut, the input, and when you assign an input, just so it's clear, it is colon equals. So where, and then quote the name of the input, not equals, because it treats one's an assignment, one's sort of a, you're not assigning the text to a variable called input. You're telling input, this is the text that I want you to search for. So slight difference in syntax. One will confuse it and won't work. The colon equals will work. But that's basically all you need to do, and then add sleeps where you want. So as a regular coding thing, sleep would be frowned upon. I mean, just sort of put this out there for anybody that is sort of more deeply into code. It's sort of, I'm accounting on certain things just happening over certain periods of time, and it doesn't always work that way, so you won't get the absolute best results, but it works really well for 99% of the cases that you're going to work with. And, it isn't always possible to wait for something. There's not a lot of signaling in vMix scripting or the shortcuts that tell you I've completed something or this is how far I've completed it. So some of this stuff is just, side effects programming that you need to do based on, what you're able to derive in terms of state from vMix scripting. So just keep that in mind. So Biz is saying that, I think the point is you can do these types of things in scripting. And I think, it isn't, as if you start to do it and just do smaller things and just sort of take some of the things you're doing with shortcuts, move them into, script start dynamic, then just work with that. I think you could definitely, build up to where you're feeling very comfortable with doing these types of things. So, actually, Biz, one of the things that is really important is that there's nothing wrong with, not knowing something. And, there's so much, and I'll be perfectly honest, there's, my programming skill is not like, I wouldn't be doing this as a, professional programmer in a corporate environment anymore. So my days of being that type of programmer are past. But, so I definitely, I often feel like when I'm, talking with like, you know, Matt here, who, does most of the coding for what we do with our products and neural net side, he, he just talks over my head all the time. So I appreciate that feeling where you feel like, oh, I'm not there. But to be honest, it's really just taking the skill sets that you have and figuring out what you can do with them and then how you can expand them. And that should not be something that ever embarrasses somebody. I don't like people to think that way, because it's who's had the opportunity to learn something and taken the time to do it. So yeah, and that's the other thing. Yeah, thank you, Michael, for pointing that out. I did put everything into the we have a place where you can download everything. So for each show where I do things that I want to demo, I usually upload all the scripts and the vMix presets. I try to make sure the assets that I use in these things, I usually put something over them, because they're not mine to give away. I buy the assets to from different things like Storyblocks or Adobe Stock or whatever. So I usually put something over there that just says demo or something of the sort. But that's just there for folks to try to take and learn from. So actually, thank you for pointing out, Michael. That's another thing, and you can go back, because we have probably almost every show this season. We have stuff to download, and you could go from there and see if that is any help. And posting things inside of this Streaming Alchemy page, or group rather, that would be something that feel free to do that. And if you have questions, and I will try to get to it, or somebody else that beats me to it could certainly help as well. So thanks. All right then. So I think this is probably a good break point if we don't have any other questions. The one thing I will say is that in here we actually use the Dunkin' logo, which I would say, if I could be sponsored by anybody on this show, it would probably be Dunkin' Donuts. And having the coffee and the donuts here is always a welcome thing. That's one of my weaknesses. So that was sort of a wishful thinking sponsor I got to add to that. So all right, everyone. Biz, thank you. I definitely appreciate you taking the time to join us here, and that goes everybody. I really appreciate the hangout after the show as well. So until our next show, hopefully in a few more weeks. Again, everybody, be well, take care, and I'll see you then. Thanks.